He reshuffled his cabinet on Friday, replacing Finance Minister George Papan-Constantino with veteran socialist Evangelos Venizelos as part of a broader cabinet reshuffle aimed at restoring waning confidence among Greeks and foreign creditors. Pakistan's chief army fights to keep his job. Pakistan's army chief, the most powerful man in the country, is fighting to save his position in the face of seething anger from top generals and junior officers since the American raid that killed Osama bin Laden, according to Pakistani officials and people who have met the chief in recent weeks. The Pakistani army is essentially run by consensus among 11 top commanders, known as the Corps commanders, and almost all of them, if not all, were demanding that General Kayani get much tougher with the Americans, even edging toward a break, Pakistanis who follow the army closely said. Washington, with its own hardline against Pakistan, had pushed General Kayani into a defensive crouch along with his troops, and if the general was pushed out, the United States would face a more uncompromising anti-American army chief, the Pakistanis said. General Ashfaq Parvez Kayani, who has led the army since 2007, faces such an intense discontent over what is seen as his cozy relationship with the United States that a colonel's coup, while unlikely, was not out of question, said a well-informed Pakistani who has seen the general in recent weeks, as well as an American military official involved with Pakistan for many years. Pakistan arrests CIA informants in Bin Laden case. Pakistan's top military spy agency has arrested some of the Pakistani informants who fed information to the Central Intelligence Agency in the months leading up the raid and that led to the death of Osama bin Laden, according to American officials. Pakistan's detention of 5 CIA informants, including a Pakistani army major, who officials had copied the license plates of cars visiting bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, in the weeks before the raid, is the latest evidence of the fractured relationship between the United States and Pakistan. It comes at a time when the Obama administration is seeking Pakistan's support in brokering an endgame in the war in neighboring Afghanistan. At a closed briefing last week, members of the Senate Intelligence Committee asked Michael J. Morrell, the Deputy CIA Director, to rate Pakistan's cooperations with the United States on counter-terrorism operations on a scale of 1 to 10. 3, Mr. Morrell replied, according to officials familiar with the exchange. The fate of CIA informants arrested in Pakistan is unclear, but American officials said that CIA Director Leon E. Panetta raised the issue when he traveled to Islamabad last week to meet with Pakistani military and intelligence officers. Come, I'll tell you a story now. From African village to a center of ordeal. She was born in a mud hut in an isolated hamlet in Africa, with no electricity or running water, a 10-minute hike to the nearest road. Unschooled, she was married off to a distant cousin. As a teenager, had a daughter and was soon widowed. Not long after, in her early 20s, she arrived in the United States, one more anonymous immigrant, struggling to make a new life. She served stew in a cubbyhole of an African restaurant in the Bronx and landed a more stable job a few years ago as a housekeeper, changing the sleek sheets at the Sofitel, New York, in Midtown Manhattan. Then came the encounter on May 14. The woman told the authorities that she was sexually assaulted by the French politician Dominique Strauss-Kahn while cleaning his suite at the hotel. Now he finds herself in the glare of international scandal. A fine story, isn't it? Lawyers for Mr. Strauss-Kahn have signaled that they will scrutinize her character and background in case it pits her world against his. Mr. Strauss-Kahn was head of the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and a leading contender for French presidency before his arrest. He has hired private detectives as well as prominent defense lawyers who have said in court papers that they have substantial information that could gravely undermine her credibility. They have not provided any details. FBI agents get leeway to push privacy bounds. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is giving significant new powers to its roughly 40,000 agents, allowing them more leeway to search databases, go through the household trash, or use surveillance teams to scrutinize the lives of people who have attracted their attention. The FBI soon plans to issue a new edition of its manual called the Domestic Investigation and Operations Guide, according to an official who has worked on the draft document and several others who have been briefed on its contents. The new rules add to several measures taken over the past decade to give agents more latitude as they search for signs of criminal or terrorist activity. The FBI recently briefed several privacy advocates about the coming changes. Among them, Michael German, a former FBI agent who is now a lawyer for the American Civil Liberties Union, argued that it was unwise to further ease restrictions on agents' power to use potentially intrusive techniques, especially if they lacked a firm reason to suspect someone of wrongdoing. We'll move on to the business world. China steps a campaign to fight inflation. China stepped up its campaign to combat rising inflation and restrain the sizzling pace of economic growth Tuesday by further restricting lending at the nation's banks after government data showed inflation remained persistently high in May. The central bank increased the so-called reserve requirement ratio, which dictates the amount of cash that banks must set aside by 0.50 percentage point, effectively reducing the amount they can lend. The ratio has been raised 6 times this year alone and now stands at 21.5% for the biggest lenders. But so far, this effort is said to be doing too little to cool the economy against inflation, and analysts and economists expect even more monetary restrictions in coming months. Only hours before the latest move to tighten bank lending, the National Statistics Bureau reported that consumer prices in China were 5.5% higher last month than a year earlier. That was slightly more than analysts had expected and faster than 5.3% reading for April.
Chinese government is well aware that inflation, in fact inflation following a big lending boom, was one of the factors that fed into the unrest around 1988 and 1989 and the Tiananmen protests. So there is if people get frustrated with rising prices, particularly rising food prices, there's a potential for social unrest.
Welcome to the world of science. U.S. government says 2 common materials pose risk of cancer. The government issued warnings on Friday about 2 materials used daily by millions of Americans, saying that one causes cancer and the other might. Government scientists listed formaldehyde as a carcinogen and said it's found in worrisome quantities in plywood, particle board, mortuaries, and hair salons. They also said the styrene, which is used in boats, bathtubs, and disposable foam plastic cups and plates, may cause cancer, but is generally found in such low levels in consumer products that risks are low. Frequent and intense exposure in manufacturing plants are far more worrisome than intermittent contact that most consumers have. But government scientists said that the consumer should still avoid contact with formaldehyde and styrene along with 6 other chemicals that were added Friday to the government official report on carcinogens. Its release was delayed for years because of the intense lobbying from chemical industry, which disputed its findings. John Booker, Associate Director of the National Toxicology Program, which produced the report, said evidence of formaldehyde's carcinogenicity was found stronger than for styrene and that consumers were more likely to be exposed to potentially dangerous quantities of formaldehyde. And in sports, Viktor Lasenica hopes for stronger round-robin events in India. Reigning World Open champion Viktor Lasenica feels it's pity that there are not many strong round-robin tournaments in India and hopes that the situation might change in the near future. With a change of guard taking place in the All India Chess Federation (AICF), Lasenica's hopes of returning to India for a strong all-play all events may well be justified in times to come. The Czech Grandmaster seeded second in the Premier six-player AAI International Grandmasters Chess Tournament that opens here on June 22nd is among the favorites for the title in the highest-rated double round-robin events ever in the country. Rated 2,681 and ranked 56 in the world, Lasenica claimed the 2008 Kolkata International Open title after being tied with K. Shashikiran. The following year, however, he fell short of defending the title. Looking ahead to the field that includes top-seeded Italian Fabiano Caruana, Shashikiran, So Wesley, Parimrajan Negi, and women's world champion Ho Yifan, the affable 23-year-old said, "Quite an interesting choice of players. I suppose it would be very fighting event."
Okay, it was quite interesting. I played in positional style, and he made a few inaccuracies, and then I obtained some advantage, and finally he made some blunder, and he resigned in bad position. So.
Was it limited?
And before we close today's event, let's have a recap of the main points. Syria unrest, fresh protests erupt. Qaeda's selection of its chief is said to reflect its flaws. UN Security Council backs second term for Ban Ki-moon. Saudi Arabia women drive cars in protest against the ban. Strike at Maruti Suzuki called off. Anna Hazare to resume anti-graft fast. And there we end with your live news analysis of the day. Be with us in the coming weeks too. Thank you.